afternoon, folks. We could ask you to find your seats. We'll begin this celebration of life. First of all, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Bruce Rainey. I'm the President and CEO of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, and I have the honor of being your guide today through this celebration of life. As you all know, a couple of weeks back, the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame lost an honored member. The province lost a sports, media, and political icon. An era, and when I think of era, I think of Pat Connolly and Harris Sullivan and Duggar McNeil, Harry Fleming. An era lost one of its last standing pillars. And most significantly, a family lost its dad, its granddad, and its great-granddad. So we celebrate the life today of the great Al Hollingsworth. And Paul and I were talking a couple of weeks back, and he told me a story that is the very microcosm of what this guy was all about. It was either 1949 or 1950. He was either 13 or 14. That's where we'll start the story. He lived in Windsor. He had no dad. His dad had left the family early on, so Al would say often that sport was one of the things that kept him mostly on the straight and narrow. He loved sports, and back in the day, in Windsor, at 2:20 in the afternoon on Wednesdays, a train would leave for Halifax. So one day he wanted to see some hockey. So he stowed away on this train. Actually stowed away, opened the freight car doors, jumped in, stowed away. It wound up in Halifax, northwest end of Halifax, down by the Titanic graveyard, still train tracks there. He jumped out and made his way up the hill and through the path to the Halifax Forum, where he paid, I think, 10 cents. 10 cents to go in with 5,000 others and watch his heroes like Duggar McNeil and Bob Bonus and Pee Wee McLaughlin and Danny Gallivan in the gondola doing the play-by-play. And boy, he, like those other 5,000, they were in their glory, having the time of their lives. Unlike the other 5,000, he had to get back to Windsor when the hockey game was over. So he found a way to hitchhike back and arrived maybe at 1 or 2 in the morning and thought to himself, boy, that was a good day. And so what that story tells you about a guy, what that paints a picture of, is a guy who was adventuresome, had a liberal dose of ingenuity, maybe a bit of a rascal in him as well, stubborn, curious, a lover of sport, but mostly a guy who, at the end of the day, would find his way back home. That's who we celebrate today. Al Hollingsworth loved the spoken word, and Al Hollingsworth loved music. And so there's going to be plenty of both today. I want to welcome to this keyboard right here, and I want to apologize. I lowered your mic to play guitar, but Owen Lee is with us today, and he is the musical director of the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Hammonds Plains. He is also the past executive director of the Nova Scotia Mass Choir. Owen? And so the wish of Mr. Hollingsworth, as he knew he was about to pass on, was to have a couple of songs sung at his funeral or celebration of life. This is a huge talent here, and I know somewhere Al is smiling and anticipating this performance. Owen Lee, ladies and gentlemen.
Tells me I am his. as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart, it's singing. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known.
Thank you, Owen. I mentioned off the top that Mr. Hollingsworth was a sports, a media, and political icon. He also loved music and loved emceeing music festivals of every genre. And in his career, in his life, he emceed his fair share in the Preston community. And it was there he met Russell Gross, who is the executive director of the Black Cultural Center. Russell and Al also were really founding partners almost in the community radio station in Sackville, so they developed a great friendship. So, some words now from the executive director of the Black Cultural Center, Mr. Russell Gross.
Good afternoon. It was great to start today off with some fiddle music and some gospel music. I know that Al would be smiling down on that. On behalf of my family and the entire CIOE 97.5 family and Chairman Jim Robson, we offer our sincere condolences to the Hollingsworth family. Today we stand with you in your grief, but we also stand with you in your celebration of a life well lived. I'm honored and humbled to be here today as we remember a dear friend, father, community leader, sports media icon. Al, by some standards, is a legend of his time. Today I would like to share a bit about a good friend, supporter, and someone that I was proud to call a mentor. The measure of a man can be defined by his status, by his stature, his motivation, and the way in which he interacted with people. Al certainly made a mark as a memorable character. Whether it was his knowledge of sports, his opinions on politics, which he had many, or his sense of humor, or his general musing about things that happen in life. I first had the opportunity to meet Al when I was in school and did a work internship at MITV. During that period, Al was the knowledge book of sports, in particular local and worldwide sports. He knew everything. Any question you had about sports, that's the guy you had to go to. Often he was considered outspoken, opinionated. Many people even thought Al was grumpy. I quickly learned that he was a kind-hearted, humble man that struggled every day in his life to be better and to do better. During this time, he provided me with a wealth of knowledge, advice, and tips that years later would do me well. I would also engage with him later in the Preston community, as Bruce had mentioned, in my role at the Black Cultural Center and his love for sharing and being involved in the community. In particular, he had a reputation in the community that went back to his days at the Dartmouth Free Press and the ability that he had to share stories from marginalized communities, those stories that no one else was telling, those good stories, those community stories. I got a chance to truly know Al in 2015 when our paths crossed at CIOE 97.5 FM, when that station went on air. Mutual friend of ours, Dr. Wayne Adams, and I had a conversation about my personal desire to volunteer at the community radio station. He shared with me that there was a new station starting up in Lower Sackville, and we set up a meeting. When I arrived at the station, Dr. Adams and I walked into the boardroom. Al was sitting there with Chairman Jim Robson. Al immediately jumped to his feet as we entered the room and yelled, "Get that guy out of here. He doesn't know anything about broadcasting. He doesn't know right from left. And he's a Blue Jays fan." I have to say, it truly caught me off guard. He then proclaimed to Jim and Wayne that it was just a joke and that we were old friends. I felt at home. After meeting had ended, Al came over to me and said, "I got you good, didn't I? What did you expect when you walked in? You expect me to give you a hug?" Al had a unique sense of humor, and you know, just to add a little levity today, here's a joke that he would constantly share with me and would always give me a chuckle. And it goes a little bit like this. Harry and Tommy were working together building a barn. Harry told Tommy to take the bag of nails and start nailing down the floorboards. So Tommy is working away at nailing down the floorboards when Harry notices that every 2 or 3 nails, Tommy would throw them away. He asked him, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that, Tommy?" Yelled Harry. "Oh, those ones are the upside down ones," said Tommy. Harry responded, "You silly man, don't throw those upside down nails away. We need them for the ceiling." During my time in working with Al at CIOE, he was the station manager, and we worked very closely together. That's when I got to really know him. I was a producer for many of the shows that he hosted at the station, and there were many, from a country show to shows that featured fiddle music to a neat show he did on military music called Stand Easy. So there was a number of things that he had passion about and he wanted to share. And of course he did spoken word programs that he interviewed in various individuals and sort of kind of set them straight. You know, it was less of an interview than sort of a scolding. But anyways, he enjoyed that. He shared with me that the idea of a special events radio station was started by him and the late Owen Davis, and that later developed in the CIOE 97.5 FM through the assistance of current chairman Jim Robson. And it came at a time in his life when he was winding down, and it gave him new purpose. Al, like Owen Davis, were, you know, true lovers of country music, and no one else was playing country music. So when you add the third founder, which was Dr. Wayne Adams, you had 3 individuals that were really passionate about country and gospel music, and that was amazing because it allowed us to put things on the airwaves that no one else was doing. He said that his work at the station and the daily life he had and the live shows that he did, incredibly enough, he did a 3-hour daily show, classic country, each and every day. And I might add, he never missed a day. He said that that gave him purpose. He felt a duty to celebrate community and, of course, play country music. Al was a huge classic country fan from his days at CHFX and played 3 hours of live music each day, as I mentioned, at CIOE. We would often go into the studio weekday afternoons and hear Al singing at the top of his lungs of songs from the Statler Brothers, from George Jones, or Merle Haggard. Those are his favorites. I can still hear him trying to hit the high note of "He Stopped Loving Her Today." I would tease him about that often, and later learned from Sharon that he actually sung in a boys' choir when he was a youth in Windsor and won a number of provincial and regional awards. He was also a lover of local music and was an advocate for sharing it. He shared so many musical tunes from local artists that were trying to get their start. He was a really big supporter of emerging artists. Until his health caused him to step away, he was with CIOE right through until December of last year. We shared a lot during those times, and he shared a lot with me. He often struggled with being good enough. He always felt that the ledger of life was unbalanced, and that he had to dedicate himself to trying to create some balance. He loved his family and Sharon, and was truly a family man, and really had a heart for his family. But one of the things that he shared with me was that how deeply of a loss it was when he lost his son. How it crippled him emotionally. How he said that he always felt love and compassion in his heart, but didn't have the ability to articulate it. He couldn't put it into words. So instead, he put it into his actions. The actions of how he volunteered in community, how he did so much for others, how he gave time to someone like me. The loss of Laurie was also unbearable for him. Al and Sharon both welcomed me into their lives and into their homes, and I was treated like a family member. Al and I spoke frequently, and I remember last year when he found out that his health wasn't going to get any better, and that he, as he put it, he had the talk with the doctor. Him and Sharon invited me over to the house, and his biggest fear was that he would die and leave Sharon alone. And it didn't end up that way, of course. And so Al was truly heartbroken. During our last conversation that we had, he shared with me how much he loved and was proud of Pamela and Paul. And he didn't forget Tamara as well, and his grandchildren. And of course, he had to add some humor to the conversation because it was getting kind of heavy. He ended the call with, "Russell, my struggles continue with no hope of escape from the hospital. Can you come break me out?" As we think about Al today, and as this is a celebration of Al's life, a life well lived, I didn't want to end it on a sad note. I will close with a story that Al shared with me many times, and almost to the point that I'd have to say to him, "You told me that before." And it involved an incident with Dr. Wayne Adams, and I called Dr. Wayne Adams this weekend and asked him for his recollection of the story. There was a time when Al had fought a battle with prostate cancer and was a guest speaker at the East Preston's Lions Club for an event. Just as he started his address, he spotted the then Deacon Wallace Smith, who is now Reverend Smith, in the audience. Al stopped mid-sentence, pointed to the deacon and said out loud, "There he is, Deacon Smith, the man who came to the hospital and prayed my cancer away." Really, ladies and gentlemen, this man prayed so hard it made me a bit nervous. And I actually believe the cancer was so nervous and afraid it left my body. Like the deacon prayed, "In the name of Jesus, depart, get out, get away from this man." So Al said he was always grateful for the prayers of Wallace Smith. But that was it. That was Al. He always had a flair for the dramatics. As Al would end his daily show each and every day at CIOE, I leave you with his original sign-off. "Well, the clock on the wall tells me that's my time. Thanks again for your time. Rest easy, Al."
Thank you to Russell Gross. Those were great words. Owen Lee is still with us. Owen's going to come back out and sing yet another hymn that was a favorite of Mr. Hollingsworth. Owen?
I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day. Still I am praying upward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, my faith on heaven's table hand, a higher place that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay. Though some may dwell where those abound, my prayer, my aim is higher ground. Beyond the midst I fain would rise to rest beneath unclouded skies. Above the earth's turmoil, peace is found by those who dwell on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, my faith on heaven's stable land, a higher place that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, my faith on heaven's table hand, a higher place that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground.
Thank you, Owen Lee. As we continue along here with the celebration of life for Al Hollingsworth, his daughter Pamela is going to come forward with a reading on behalf of the family.
I don't know who thought it was such a good idea to have me read after that music. Music, like my dad, definitely gets to my heart, but I hope you guys have gone to the bathroom. I didn't have the courage to do this for my mother, so I decided that I would do 2 short readings today. Short, I promise, absolutely. So they speak to both my parents a little bit. Obviously, this is about Dad today, but everything I say about Dad, I mean for Mom too. The first reading is just a paragraph from Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted. Something your hand touched some way, so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The other reading is a poem called Remember Me by Margaret Mead. To the living I am gone. To the sorrowful, I will never return. To the angry, I was cheated. But to the happy, I am at peace, and to the faithful, I have never left. I cannot speak, but I can listen. I cannot be seen, but I can be heard. So as you stand upon a shore, gazing at a beautiful sea, as you look upon a flower and admire its simplicity, remember me. Remember me in your heart, your thoughts, and your memories of the times we loved, the times we cried, the times we fought, the times we laughed. For if you always think of me, I will never have gone.
So Paul and I were having a hot chocolate the other day. And he told me outside of the New York Rangers, the Montreal Expos, Duke Snider and John Ferguson, the staples in the Hollingsworth house were history, military history, and fiddle music. And he said, as a matter of fact, one of my dad's favorite ever pieces is from the Ken Burns Civil War documentary, and it's called A Shokin Farewell. Boy, it'd be nice to have that played at my dad's celebration of life. And I said, well, I know somebody who knows that really, really well. He goes, you do? I said, yeah, I'm married to her. And he said, do you think she'd do it? And I said, yep, she'll do it. So my wife is a two-time East Coast Music Award winner, and this is one of the most beautiful pieces of music you'll ever hear. It's called A Shokin Farewell. I'll let her come here and sidle over there, and this is for Al. is a phenomenal piece of music. So this, as I mentioned, this was the loss of one of the great pillars of this era. And it touched a lot of people, and Paul was telling me he got in the neighborhood of 6,000 texts or messages. 6,000. Here are a few. From Mickey McDonald. Your dad is truly a legend, an inspiring man who donated his time and energy thanklessly. He was a great man. Don Koharski. I wouldn't be who I am without Al Hollingsworth and the support he gave me. John Moore. I always admired and had immense respect for Al, as he, as well as Pat Connolly, were mentors for many of us younger journalists. Former Nova Scotia Premier Stephen McNeil, who I believe is here today, your father touched a lot of people. His life of service, of others, military, sports, and media allowed for him to impact so many in a positive way. Peter Spurway wrote, Al was a leader in sports reporting and community development. I was a better reporter for having known him and having seen his work firsthand. From Percy Paris, your grief is shared among many. I know how proud you must be as a result of the legacy left behind by your dad. I know your father will rest in peace because he left it all in the world he lived and shared it with all of us. Former junior hockey star Robbie Forbes. Alfie was a legend on the Nova Scotia sports scene. I was blessed to have been able to spend many incredible hours when I was young talking and laughing about sports and politics and the issues of the day with Al over a beer or coffee. I would always look forward to reading Al's comments about our junior games in the Daily News. He was always kind and supportive in his remarks. And from Rick Grant, Al Hollingsworth caught a wide swath through the field of journalism through several generations of reporters and in several forms of media with so many organizations. Al's greatest journalistic achievement, however, is Paul. No wonder he was so proud of him. It's all about segues, isn't it? Yeah. So I can tell you, Ernest Hemingway once defined courage as grace under pressure. And the year that Paul and Tamara and this family has had has been the very definition of grace under pressure and courageous. And Paul's going to come up here and do something that's going to be tough, but there was no way he was not going to do it. So on behalf of his dad, folks, here's Paul Hollingsworth.
Thank you very much, everybody. And excuse me, I gotta fix this microphone 1 second. I'm the tallest guy. Stephen McNeil's here. I'm the second tallest guy, so I have to fix this microphone. Look, I have a lot of stuff going on inside my head today. I've been thinking about my brother all day long. I've been thinking about him for the past 2 weeks, obviously, given the circumstance. And I'm looking at the crowd here today and I'm gauging all the social media reaction and all the kind phone calls and the text messages. And if my brother were here and he was standing next to me right now, he would whisper in my ear and say, we need a 50-50 draw so we can make some money off of this. And for those of you who knew Bryce, $5 a ticket, 3 for $20. See if you notice, see if you notice. Bryce died back in 1991. He's been with me every single day. He walks with me every single day. Everything I do for my brother Bryce. I tell people this all the time, and I mean it. But today, he's also with my parents, and I think that's a beautiful thing. They are reunited along with Lauren, and it makes me so, so happy. Before I get into my prepared remarks, I want to thank Bruce Rainey. Such a good guy, an enormous talent. Bruce is kind of the CBC version of Paul Hollingsworth. We kind of have the same careers in different networks. So we don't go around pumping up CBC people too much, but today you're my man, I appreciate it. Kendra, an enormous talent. Owen, I heard Owen Lee sing a few months back at an event I was at the Black Cultural Center. It brought a tear to my eye. It brought a tear to my eye again. I am the least talented person you will see on this stage today, and I'm so blessed to have these people here. We're so blessed to have these people here today, paying tribute to my father. And of course, Russell Gross, beautiful words, and my dad asked me to ask him to speak at his service, so very grateful for all the kindness. I want to share something with you. I have a medal in my pocket. I carry it with me every day. So as a context to this medal, my sister's memorial service was 1 year ago today. And my mom died 5 months ago yesterday. So I had a lady send me a medal to the TV station after we lost my mom. And the medal says, "Light in the forest, I am not afraid." And I carry it with me every day. If I'm on TV, it's in my pocket ever since. And it's my little chunk of bravery. And it reminds me that there are people in this community who still look out for me. In many ways, I'm still a 10-year-old nerdy boy who lives on Lawrence Street, hanging around the neighborhood trying to find his way. So I share that with you because I appreciate the support we've had, and I appreciate the support I've had. I want to offer an extended thank you to so many of you. I've received, as Bruce mentioned, thousands of messages, phone calls, emails, social media posts, literally thousands. The most touching part of this for me, for Tamara, for Pamela, for all of us, is that you've mentioned things about our father that we didn't know. I honestly didn't know some of the chapters of his life, and while I knew he was a popular guy around town, I didn't know he was this popular. Who expects 6,100 text messages on their iPhone? I had no idea people thought of him so highly. He had no idea people thought of him this way. We spoke about his memorial service several weeks before he passed away, and he thought we should have it at the Lions Club, which holds about 100 people. He was modest. He had no concept the community would respond the way he responded. But they did, and it's truly touching. Our dad was hospitalized for 4 months. After my mother passed away, he pretty much went in the hospital right away within a couple of weeks. A lot of people went to see him. A lot of people went to call him a lot of people called him on the phone, and they saw him in person, just checking in to see how he's doing. I'm hesitant to do this because whenever you list a bunch of names, you're bound to forget some. So I truly apologize in advance if I leave someone out. I've had a lot going on the past few weeks. But the people who called him or went to see him were Stephen McNeil, Percy Paris, Rick Grant, Paul Gallagher, we call him Rooster, Steve Murphy, my man Steve Murphy, Vince McLean, Gordy Miles, Kevin McNamara, the aforementioned Russell Gross, Bill Riley, Adie and Bev, Bruce Rainey, his sisters Bev and Karen, along with Laurie, his 4 grandchildren, and many, many others. So thank you very much. The way you rallied around him made him feel like $1,000. It means the world. And just too briefly on the ad-lib here, his sisters Karen and Bev are here. And I wanted you to know that I was thinking a special thought for both of you these past 2 weeks. I know what it's like to lose a sibling. I know what it's like to lose an older brother. I don't care how old you are. It's very difficult. And so I was thinking especially for you two as well these past few weeks about how you're holding up. It's not easy. When people get old, when people get sick, they have to fight. But they need people to fight for them. They need doctors to fight for them. They need nurses to fight for them. They need the hospital staff to fight for them. They need other people to step in and help them lead the battle at such a crucial time. They can't do it on their own. For my dad, the person who helped him the most was my wife, Tamara. She went to see him every single day for months, multiple times daily. We all went every day pretty much, but she went multiple times daily. She brought him newspapers, coffee, fast food cravings, treats. She provided constant company. She listened to his stories. She endured his crankiness. Every day she stood over his bed with my father's huge glass of water and his elbow straw, and she would stand there and help him drink and stay hydrated. What she did for our father, what you did for my dad, was amazing, and I thank you. Folks, Al Hollingsworth was quite a man. He was a storyteller, an athlete, a coach, a gym teacher, a police officer, a boxing ring announcer, a sports historian, a military historian, a one-time race car driver, emphasis on one time. He was a dinner table debater, a political junkie, a devil's advocate, a person who identified with the outsider, who rooted for the underdog, and he was a man just like his son who never lost faith in the concept of happy endings. He loved music and the arts. He was a huge Sidney Crosby fan. He was a huge Rick Bonas fan. He was a huge New York Rangers fan. He enjoyed Western movies. He loved Nova Scotia. He thought this place was awesome. He was wicked funny. Man, he had a good sense of humor. And he was, in the truest sense, a full-blown adventurer. Our dad did everything 100 miles an hour, including driving a car. Our vacations with him left us terrified, exhausted, and injured. My father was born in 1936. 1936 was during the middle of the Great Depression. He understood poverty because he experienced it. He was raised in a single-parent household. Our dad spent his childhood feeling somewhat abandoned by his own father and probably unloved. He never knew his dad. When our dad was 3 years old, the Second World War began. Growing up in Windsor, Nova Scotia, my dad knew what it was like to see a young teenage boy who lived down the street, get on the bus, go to the recruiting station, and never come back. It is my contention that the Great Depression, his experience with his father, and the heartbreak that went with that, and the war formed him. In the late 1940s, he needed an escape. Looking back, he needed to be rescued. What did he do? He discovered sports. He played everything, participated in basically any sporting event he could find. Through sports, he kept busy, he made friends, he learned how to be connected to his community. Philosophers say it's because of tragedy that we play games. I believe this applies to all aspects of my father's life. He used sports as an escape to bring his levels of personal crisis under control. As an athlete, he was a good goalie. He played junior hockey until the 1950s at a level that today would be compared to junior A, maybe junior B. He just wasn't a good baseball player, he was an elite baseball player. When he moved to Halifax in the 1950s, right away he became involved in sports as a way to fit in his new home city. He coached multiple teams in both hockey and baseball. He managed teams. He served as an executive for several associations. For 2 years, he was the Nova Scotia scout for the New York Rangers. There's something you might not know. I've looked at, well, there's a picture at the back of the room. He's with the Queen Elizabeth Lions as a head coach back in 1959, 1960. I encourage you to look at that picture and look at his eyes. He was a determined young man. He was going places. He was going to be a part of the action no matter what happened in his life. As the 1950s rolled around, my dad decided it was time to find a serious job. So he enrolled in the military, spent almost a decade serving our country. While in the military, he met my mother at base Borden, which is roughly 100 kilometers from Toronto. My parents had Pamela, Laurie, and Bryce. All three were born in Ontario. In the late 1960s, my dad decided it was time to get out of the military, move back to Nova Scotia, and they had me in 1969. I've always been most proud of the fact, of all the stuff I'm proud of with my father, most proud of the fact that out of the 6 of us in our family, we were the only 2 to get it right, and we were born in Nova Scotia. It matters to me greatly. Once back in Nova Scotia, my dad basically picked up where he left off when it came to his commitment to Nova Scotia local sports. Within months, he was coaching numerous hockey and baseball teams. He coached junior A and junior B hockey. He coached junior and senior baseball and midget baseball for a time at the same time while he was coaching junior baseball. He was a baseball umpire and a linesman. I watched him umpire baseball games for Nova Scotia Junior Baseball at Baisley Field when I was in elementary school. He was doing that recently in my life. And he was an executive for many leagues and associations, sometimes at a national level, over a 40-year period beginning in 1969. He was a ring announcer for boxing, a gig he performed for decades. And one time he was a celebrity guest ring announcer for Grand Prix Wrestling here at the Halifax Forum, and my father got to watch him get the fake crap beaten out of him by wrestlers, and it was the best thing ever. It was so cool, because he was a showman as well. Our family history is clouded when it comes to pinning down when exactly our dad became a journalist. He made contributions to the Windsor weekly newspaper as a sports reporter when he was only 14 years old. In the military, he did some writing for numerous military publications. Back in Nova Scotia in civilian life, he decided to pursue a career in journalism, using his expertise in sports, his passion for politics, and his connection to the community as a springboard. He became sports editor of the Dartmouth Free Press weekly newspaper and eventually became the managing editor. While working at the Dartmouth Free Press, he also worked nights across the street, making pizzas at Pizza Delight, doing whatever he had to do to provide for his family. He later became the sports editor of the Bedford Sackville Daily News, and that paper became the Halifax Daily News, and our father became one of the managing editors for that paper. He was a columnist, and a damn good columnist. He wrote daily columns appearing on page 3 in the current affairs section. He also wrote a daily sports column and a Saturday special column that also appeared in the current affairs section, wrapping up the week that was in all aspects of community culture. He was a gifted writer, a driven reporter, and he left an indelible mark on print journalism in our province. His work in print media also blended into broadcasting. He had a long and successful career as a radio broadcaster. As a sports fan and participant and journalist, he took his sons everywhere. From the age of 5 years old, I sat in the press box for Nova Scotia Voyageurs games here at the Halifax corner. Sweat and spit landed on me. It was 60% disgusting, 40% awesome, and I loved it because he was taking his boy close to the action, and I was along for the ride. My brother was along for the ride. It was amazing. We traveled all over Nova Scotia with our dad. We watched games, football games, basketball games at all levels in every town and city you can think of. The environment I was raised in had a profound influence on me, obviously. I've been hanging around newsrooms literally since I was 3 years old. Radio newsrooms, TV newsrooms, and now television newsrooms. My father, by example, showed me the way and taught me to be a good man first, be a good journalist second. Never let anyone outwork you. He'd always say, be the hardest working person in the world. In order to be successful in our field, my dad said, you have to know a lot of people. You have to make good impressions in the community. You must be dedicated to the notion of public service. You must be well-liked and trusted, and you have to have a lot of friends. He said, if they don't like you, you don't have a career. And I think he was onto something with that, and it was very good advice. On that point, our father taught all of his kids the value of friendship. He would say to me many times, friends are meant to last for life. You should always be fiercely loyal and present in your friends' lives. In our family, being a good friend is a personal code of conduct. And when our dad was with you, he was on your side for life, especially for younger people who he mentored and looked out for. To hear him talk, even in recent weeks when he was on his deathbed, he spoke of the affection he held for former young athletes like Robbie Forbes and Harry Forbes, Chris Clark, Paul Talbot, Patty Shellman. He loved these guys. They were part of his crew, and he looked out for them. And here he was in the final stages of his life, and all the love and nostalgia that was coming through him, he was thinking back to these young people who he made an impression on, but they made an impression on him. It was a special conversation. If I may, I'm also grateful that many of my dad's friends have now become my friends. My father's crew is my crew. Intergenerational friendships help make our community so special. I learned that from my dad. One of my dad's greatest gifts to me, Pat Conley into my life. Mr. Conley was my dad's best friend for 60 plus years, and he was such an influential mentor to me. He was present in my life almost on a daily basis, and he helped me. My dad didn't want to help me with my career. He wanted me to do it on my own, so Mr. Conley stepped in and he helped me behind the scenes. and showed me the way very early on. He also watched over me very closely after my brother died. I think about Pat Connolly a lot, and I think about what a gift it was that my dad made sure that man was present in my life. I've been asked numerous times some of my favorite stories from my dad, 2 or 3. The first story is a pretty short one, but it speaks to that theme of loyalty that was embedded in him and that he wanted his kids to learn from. I was probably grade 4, grade 5, and on Barrington Street. I'm not sure, it might have been Cleese, but it was a downtown sporting goods store. And my dad always said, if you're buying a big... And I surprised him. I said, look at my glove, what do you think? And he looked at it, he goes, it's nice. Where'd you get it? And I said, I got it at a store downtown. And he goes, do you have the receipt? I said, yeah, I have the receipt. Showed him the receipt. Have you used it yet? I said, no, I haven't used it at all. I wanted to show you first. He goes, come with me. So we go in the car, we drive downtown, we go back to the sporting goods store, and we go in and we get a full cash refund for my baseball glove. Then we go back in his car, we drive to Bayers Road Shopping Center, we walk in, go down the escalator, and we go to Bob Bonus Sporting Goods, and we buy the exact same glove there. And we walked out, and my dad said to me, he goes, I'm going to tell you this once, I'm never going to tell you again. We buy our sporting goods at this store. I love that about him. I was in a master class of lessons in life when it came to friendship and loyalty. Nothing against the other businesses, but his friend owned that place, and that's where we were going to spend our money and support. The second story I'll tell, I have 3 stories. The second story I'll tell, my brother died at Christmas time in 1991, and we had his funeral on a Thursday, which I think was 6 days before Christmas, so it was a really bad time. And so on that Saturday, which would have been the 21st, 22nd, maybe 23rd of December, leading into Christmas, the phone rang at our house. I was living at home then. And one of my sisters or my mother said, Paul, the phone's for you. So I picked up the phone and said, hello. And the person said, is this Paul? I said, well, yes, it is. And he said, hi, Paul, my name's Bart Starr. And I'm like, well, I've heard of a name called Bart Starr. He was a quarterback for the Green Bay Packers and one of the best quarterbacks of all time, but it can't be that Bart Starr. So I said, Bart Starr? And he said, yes, I'm calling from Milwaukee. I used to be an NFL quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. So if you're going to do a Mount Rushmore of NFL quarterbacks, Bart Starr might be on it. He's a pretty big name. And I'm thinking somebody's playing a prank on me or something's gone sideways here. And so we get to talking, and I'm finally convinced it's the real Bart Starr. And he said to me, he said, look, he goes, I heard your brother died, and I know we don't know each other, and I know we live far, far away, but I want you to know that I lost my son a year and a half ago, and he was the same age as your brother. And he died through a similar circumstance as your brother. And I wanted you to know that there are people like me cheering for you. And I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. And I want to let you know that you're going to be okay, because I'm okay. And if I can get through this, you can get through this. And I said to him, I said, Bart Starr, how did you know about me? How did you get my number? And he said, Alfie's a friend of mine. My dad knew Bart Starr. My dad knew everybody. It was one of the kindest conversations for me at one of the most critical times in my life. But the fact that my dad knew this guy and never told me he knew this guy, never humble bragged that he knew this guy, was absolutely amazing. And he arranged for this phone call to help pick me up at a pretty lousy time. And to this day, whenever I know someone who loses someone, I'm always reminded to pick up the phone and call them, just like that fine man did for me many, many years ago. And the last story I have, it's about my career. So as I tell this story, it's going to sound like I'm talking about myself. I don't mean it to be that way, but it's going to end with a tie-in to my dad. I graduated, I got my first degree at St. Mary's, and after that I got a degree in journalism at University of King's College. And so here I was, 24, 25, with a couple of university degrees, and I didn't have a job, but I wanted to work in television. But I didn't have the experience. So I called up ATV, which is now CTV, and I asked, could I come and be a volunteer in the newsroom? So I worked for 4 months 40 hours a week as a volunteer in the newsroom. And then finally, just around Christmas time, they gave me a job, paying me minimum wage as the teleprompter operator. So Murph's here, Steve Murphy's here, so he'd anchor the news, and I'd be the guy in the control room doing the teleprompter. And the person who hired me said, this is an opportunity, but it's what you make of it that's gonna count. So it didn't come easy to me, it really didn't. I used to stay late at night, we'd drive Tamara crazy, and I'd stand on the anchor desk and I would practice. I'd go into the voiceover booth and I would practice. The camera people, Paul Creelman's here, camera people would take me into the community, I'd do stand-ups in the street corner, and I'd practice. Ian Morrison was the assistant news director. I'd go into his office on my own time after work, and I'd have these voiceover scripts, and I'd read them out loud hundreds of times, and he'd stop me and tell me how to mark up my script and how to emphasize the different syllables and get the script off the paper, he would say. So I'd practice and practice and practice, and then I'd show my results to my bosses, and they'd say, not bad, you need to get better, keep trying. So for 2 years, I worked behind the scenes at CTV, ATV, looking for a break. One time, finally, not that I wanted them to leave, but Paul Meunier quit. He was the host for Live at 5. He took a job as an anchor in Vancouver. So my boss at the time, Jay Witherby, came to me and said, I got an opportunity for you. I was like, what? He said, we're gonna get you to do the plays of the week every Friday, because that was the little sports fun segment that Paul had on Live at 5. That's gonna be your gig now. This is your opportunity to be on TV and have a start. So that was on about a Monday. I was terrified. That fear of failure started to sink in. I was like the dog that caught the car. Now what do I do? And self-doubt creeped in, panic creeped in, insecurity creeped in. I was a mess. So I didn't sleep for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night. I didn't eat much that week. I was going to pieces. And as the hour approached for 5 o'clock, I had to go live on TV for 4 minutes and make my debut. I called my dad. I was probably on air about 10 to 6. So I called my dad at about 20 after 5, maybe 25 minutes after, so about 15 minutes before I went on air. And he answered the phone. I said, do me a favor, please don't watch. And he said, why? I said, Dad, everyone knows you. They know I'm your kid. You're watching. All my friends are watching. Their parents are watching. My school teachers are watching. Everyone watches this damn station. They're all going to see me, and I'm going to suck. And I'm going to make a fool of myself and embarrass myself, and I might be a one-hit wonder. This might come crashing down on me right now, and I'm afraid of public failure. And if I know that you're not watching, I might feel a little bit better, because I can't have you sitting at home in your chair mortified by what a poor performance your son had. And he's like, whoa, where's this coming from? So he had a bit of a tough talk with me inside of 120 seconds. He said, first of all, you always have a lot of self-confidence. I'm always telling you to dial down your self-confidence. Now you're being insecure. So he said, lean on your self-confidence. So I said, okay. He said, remember, you have a buoyancy to you. You can do this. I said, okay. And I didn't know this, but my father stayed out of the way of my career. He wasn't involved at all. He didn't want any form of nepotism or anything attached to it. He wanted me to find my own way. So I'd call him up and say, hey, I got a job at a TV station, or hey, I'm doing stuff for TSN. He had no part of it, so he was just a spectator on the side. But he had a lot of friends at ATV who were my superiors, and unbeknownst to me, they were looping him in and telling him about the work I was doing behind the scenes, trying to practice, trying to get better, trying to perfect my craft, trying to be good enough to have an opportunity to at least have a chance at success. And my dad said, in addition to your self-confidence, don't forget that you put the training in, because I've been asking around about you. You're putting the work in. I'm proud of you. You're doing it the right way. Lean on your training, lean on your self-confidence, and I have no doubt you'll be fine. And then he said to me, if it means that much to you, I won't watch. I said, you promise? He goes, I promise, I won't watch. So we hung up the phone, and look, I don't know how many people in the room have been on TV before for the first time, but this was my spot. And the lights came up, I had to There's a little microphone on, I had an earpiece in, people were talking to me, my legs were wobbling, I was terrified. But I didn't suck. I got through it. I was okay. It was a passable first start. And after the segment ended and went to commercial, a couple of people in the newsroom congratulated me on having at least a solid start. And a lovely woman named Christina Holtorf, who was the assignment editor, looked at me with a smile on her face, and she said, "There's a call for you on line 1. I said, okay. So I picked up the phone, it was my dad. He said, "I lied, I watched, you were great." And of course he did, he had my back. Without that moment for me, my career doesn't happen. If I will say in all humility, I wasn't born with natural talent. I had to plug away at it. And without that pivotal moment in getting on the other side of it, I'm not sure what anything else happens for me in this career, but I kicked open that door, and my dad was my wingman through it. He coached me up, he talked me through it, and he was there to congratulate me on the other side. And I think he realized how big of a moment that was, and he leaned into it. And I always think about that when it comes to how my career, and I say our career because my dad was a part of it, but how our career evolved after that one moment. Folks, as I start to wind down my remarks, it should be noted that my dad and I, while we had a lot in common, we also had some differences between us. We had some things that were not in common. He was mostly a print journalist. I'm a TV guy. I would refer to print journalism dinosaurs, and he called me a TV prima donna. So we had that. He liked to have a few drinks. I don't. My dad liked to have a drink. He was part of that generation. He would, watch an Expos game with a rum and coke in his hand. It's all good, but we were wired differently that way. Like many of his generation, he could be profane. I am not. He had a salty sense of humor, and in certain circumstances, in certain crowds, he could speak in a certain way that would kind of shock you. But I should note, he was always the perfect example of a gentleman in public. But behind the scenes, he was a good old boy. He loved to share his opinions on Facebook. I don't. I'm more private. He loved the New York Rangers. I can't stand them. And their goofy red pants. I hate the Rangers. My dad loved the Rangers. I loved the Montreal Canadiens. He hated them. He absolutely couldn't stand them. He loved politics. I don't. I follow public policy. I'm interested in public policy. I'm engaged in how our electoral process goes. But my dad, and I was talking to Stephen McNeil before we started, and he knows this, my dad thrived on partisan politics, that roll up the sleeves, bare knuckles politics, a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, which he was, arguing with the dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, which he was not. He loved that part of politics. I've never really been wired that way. But through all the similarities and all the differences, my father and I had one amazing thing in common, and it's a big thing, it's a huge thing. We shared a love of baseball. He taught his sons to love baseball the way he loved it. He taught me about the 1948 Boston Braves, Warren Spahn and Johnny Sain. Spahn and Sain, and pray for rain. He insisted Duke Snider's 1953 season was the single best, most underrated performance of the 20th century, and he was right. I encourage you to look it up. He told me the Oakland A's in 1972, 73, and 74 were the best constructed teams in the 20th century, and he was right. One of my favorite conversations with my father happened when I was 9 years old. 9 years old. Now think about this, I was in grade 3. He came home and I told him I had memorized the entire 25-man roster of the 1973 Oakland A's. He said to me, he looked at me, he goes, all right, let's have it. So I listed all 25 players. He looked at me and said, do that again. So I did it again. And then he said, in typical Alfie way, I am pleased. Let's go get a bag of chips. And I should mention, I've been memorizing baseball stats ever since. Roughly 10 days before my father passed away, I went to see him at his room at palliative care around 10 o'clock at night. That was the second time I'd been to see him that day. We had a meaningful conversation. He told me, even though his son, daughter, and wife were all dead, and he was clearly very sick, he still wanted to live. He did not want to give up. I loved that about him. The old guy had fight in him to the very end. Slowly, as he nodded off and went to sleep, I watched him sleep for roughly 20 minutes. Sitting there, given the context of the situation, I asked myself some difficult questions that were connected to my family history, questions that were on my mind given the year we'd had. Like, why didn't I do more to help my brother when he was alive? If I had, I could have maybe altered my family history and spared my parents unimaginable pain. The answer I concluded was I was too young to know better, and in life, the help you offer those closest to you is not always the help that is accepted. It's never the help, it seems, that is accepted, and my dad knew that. I also wondered why I didn't do more to fully understand the full character and complexity of the person laying in front of me. He had lived an amazing life. He had overcome so much. He was a special and central force in all of our lives. But yet my comprehension of him at that moment seemed to barely scratch the surface. Then I was reminded of the verse I learned in church growing up. Grant that I may realize that the trifling of life creates differences, but that in the higher things, we are all one. Al Hollingsworth was our father. He was dad, and we were all one. The goodness of Pamela is his legacy. My life, my career, my family, my attempt at activism in the community are extensions of him. In closing, let me say this. Long after the service ends, long after our dad has passed far from the scene, if people ever ask you, was Al Hollingsworth a good man? You can tell them this. He was the best man. He was better than most of us. He fought the good fight. He made us laugh. He was a good Nova Scotia boy who made enormous contributions and leaves our province better than the way he found it. I ask God to bless my brother. I ask God to bless my sister. I ask God to bless my mother. And please bless and watch over my father. They are all reunited. I look forward to seeing them all again someday. And I'm grateful to see all of you today. Thank you.
Those should absolutely be the final words you hear today. There are refreshments and some stuff over at the table if you want to stick around for some fellowship. And when you're struggling to figure out a way to wrap up something like this, you always turn to somebody like Dr. Seuss, who said, "Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened." Let's remember Al Hollingsworth well. Thank you folks for coming.